Yeah, hi, very good afternoon, everybody. And this is the last session. Very deliberate and well-planned act of the organizers to having made it an academician there till the last session, and lot many expectations of the industry, which Professor Pradeep Kulshrestha and my fellow academicians, we are here and will in our humbleness, all our humbleness, we are going to take all these suggestions so that we ensure that the future ready lawyers are there. But I am very sure that, law schools are juggling to equip. See, AI has posed those challenges. I believe that everybody is juggling, and so are the law schools. And starting from the first panel, Professor Sudhir was there, and before that, Justice Medha. So whatever has been pointed out, that's very well taken, but at the same time, I invite all the industry experts and the panelists to have refresher course who feel that they have not had enough in their law schools and not enough was taught there. So let us top up your knowledge once again with the freshest courses in different subjects. So to begin with this panel 7, on which we are going to talk about something which is very important other than legal education, but at the same time which we think that we need to inculcate in legal education. And I welcome all my fellow panelists here, and I have Dr. Sanjeev Gemawat here, who has joined online. Hello, how are you? And I hope you are doing well and ready to answer all those questions that not only, you see, the kind of weather that we are facing, environment, all those issues which talk about climate change, those issues which pertain to global warming, that pertain to environment in Delhi and all that, all those problems that we have been facing, that's one. And the second is social. So when we talk about all those, social things, whether there has been a fair play, whether there have been implementation of labor legislations, and when we talk about governance, so be it corporate governance or be it any kind of transparency, accountability. So all these issues we are going to, all the industry experts are here with whom I am going to steer through this session. So my question goes to all the panelists here, and my first question, if you have to come back to your law schools, which course do you think in ESG, which kind of module, which kind of course, which kind of course content or syllabi would you recommend for the law students? Over to you. So we should be, all of you, one by one. And choicest module.
I know. No, but the advantage is if you speak first, the last guy has a problem. So good afternoon, everyone. And so my name is Zameer Nathani. I am the Group General Counsel for CarDekho. CarDekho is in the limelight because Amit Jain also is now on the Shark Tank. I head the ESG in the company in addition to the legal compliance and governance. If you ask me the question on what is the kind of course or the curriculum we would expect if we visit the university, I'll divide this into 3 parts, all right? So just I'll give you some background of the information. Like for example, $20.9 billion were allocated in United States 5 years back for any company which is focused on ESG. The overall fund dedication in Europe was about 132 billion, okay? So when we are talking of these numbers, these are equivalent to the richest people in India, okay? So that's the kind of numbers I'm talking about. Number 2 is that when you speak about ESG, there were certain incidences which had taken place and what was the kind of impact it had created on the companies. I'll give you one example is about Petrobras, or for example Enron, all right? Or there was a Gulf oil spill which had taken place. The shares of those companies reduced by 50%. You can imagine the loss which was consumed by that, All right. So these are the two critical things which are now being factored for ESG compliance by your investors. Okay. Now, when you talk about the three things which you should put down in a course in ESG, number one is what are the ESG compliance from an environment, social and governance perspective you are looking at. Okay. Like for example, when you speak about CarDekho. Now, my business is about selling of used car, new car, car insurance and car financing. These are the four mandates I've got. Now, used car, of course, when you take as a standalone company, the emission rate is very high because when you sell anything which is used car, the emission is high. So what did we do? We increased the sale of the EV car to offset the ESG impact. Okay. Number two, most important, when you conduct that ESG activity, there's a report known as Business Sustainability and Responsibility Report, all right? BRSR report, BSR report which is there. This is your ESG report. So with all the data you have collected, right, from your electricity bill to the air travel which has been done by the people, you arrive at a number of emission. For example, 800 is your emission. That BSR report is your second subject matter because it shows what is the impact which is happening when you have the ESG compliance in place, how you can reduce that particular emission level, all right? And third is the recognition which you can get on a global stature, all right? So when CarDekho came out last year with their first ever ESG report of one of the unlisted startups with high disclosure, we send it to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. There is a recognition of bronze and silver as a starting point you have got. So I think the meaning of the ESG part, which has to be covered in letter and spirit, ESG report, and global recognition which the entity can obtain or by filing it with various authorities like United Nations. I think these are 3 points I would like to cover in my curriculum.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So from after listening to unicorn from unicorn's mouth, now we can have Amit. So what would you like to say from JSA?
I would love to see a curriculum, and I'd love to go back myself and encourage my partners, where you would train lawyers to look at risk and value in changing realities. So I would say that when you're looking at the AI development, you're looking at the digital platform, you're looking at climate change, how is a lawyer to understand the legal, regulatory policy and the commercial realities, and to re-equip the business that they are assisting and working with to realize value and mitigate risks. Unless you are able to encourage lawyers to start thinking out of the box beyond Section 5 and Rule 3, to engage with the real world, we will always have a challenge that most lawyers in practice find. And therefore, law schools have to move to that level where they integrate the knowledge with technology, and management schools, and provide that kind of training. We are unfortunately a little distance away. I think we are moving in that right direction. Some of the private universities are coming around to it, but I have still found, because lots of youngsters, every year we are recruiting people who are coming from these law schools, who ought to have done the cross credits, but I don't find the genuine cross credits. And that is a gap, which is a skill gap. I'm not on the dais to criticize, I'm here to suggest so that we can do better. There is a lot to be done. As Pawan, my batchmate and good friend, said in the last session, the guardrails have to be built while you're flying the aircraft, not after you land. These are changing realities. Climate change is on us. Now, when the changing reality is in your face, look at Indian situation, let's examine one question. You need to go through energy transition, which means migrate to renewables, while simultaneously securing energy security. We are still a developing nation. Citizens in remote corners still don't have access to 24 hours of electricity. They are still getting there. Industries are still struggling with it from time to time. Now, in that scenario, we can't give up coal. Yet we have to migrate. Now, this is a real world solution, which will be found not just by looking at law, not just by looking at economics, not just technology, but pulling it all together. are we now in a situation where we can offer to lawyers in practice every 5 or 6 years to go back to a law school in an integrated course, 1 week, 2 week program, where they could re-equip themselves in any such scenario? That is the first thing I would look at, and I would love to see that, and I will do that till the last day of my life, because keeping yourself engaged with realities and the future is all there is to your being alive and successful as a professional and a living person. Thank you.
Yeah, Vaibhav.
Thank you for that question. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vaibhav Kakkar. I'm a senior partner at Saraf and Partners. When you look at the term ESG, it has actually 3 components to it: environment, social, and governance. I would like to particularly focus on the last one, which is governance. See, if you look at India's sort of business climate, you look from how post-liberalization, how our capital markets have done really well. Most businesses which about 15 years back were largely promoter-owned and promoter-controlled. Today, when some of us do IPOs of companies, we don't even know who the promoter of the company is. Most companies these days, the startups, by the time their growth story goes through an engine and they get to the IPO mode, there's so many institutional investors, private equity, venture capital investors sitting in the company that the promoter or the founder is actually sitting with sub 10% equity. Very similar to what the US culture is. And in that kind of paradigm where promoter holdings are going down, this overall framework in which businesses were being largely run as promoter shops and they would run businesses as they please, that is changing. There is now a responsibility that the board has towards all its stakeholders. The key employees know that they're not accountable just to the promoter, and if they will be accountable just to the promoter, you will see all kind of messes that happen with a lot of scams that happened in India over the last few years. So company has to be a separate sort of accountable player in the sector. You will not be seen as being only answerable to the promoters. And that Lala mentality will give way to professionalism, because investors also in the unlisted space, full disclosure, we are representing one very large founder of an education tech company which is in the middle of a lot of news. But you're seeing across the board where the earlier shareholder activism was largely seen in the listed space. You're now seeing that in the unlisted space as well, where equity investors, institutional investors are sitting. And those institutional investors look the other way. And I'm not calling out any names here. If any delinquent founders or any notorious founders are not booted out when they see anything wrong happening, then even those investors are questioned in turn by their own investors who put in money in those funds. So I think governance is, going to be an important focus in times to come. And shareholder activism is one course or one subject that ought to be definitely a credit course in law schools. Class actions, shareholder class actions. That's another sort of area where, Indian law is nothing but a cut copy paste of the US law. Insofar as class action is concerned. Very recently, class action proceedings have actually started. Yeah. Incidentally, we are on one side and his firm is on the other side, where we are actually trying to pursue a class action. So I think shareholder activism is going to be one very important area where we will see a lot of action, and therefore that's one area that law school should really focus on. One very quick point also would be the fact that, as both fine gentlemen sort of pointed out, if India has to reach its goal of becoming a $10 trillion economy, we need a lot of capital. We need a lot of equity and debt money. And guess what? We as a country don't have that much. That's the harsh reality. All of that money will come in from the developed world. India on the debt side has now been added to JP Morgan index, and you saw almost a $20 billion upswing coming in for India on the government securities side. So all of that money which will come in from the developed world will come in with riders on ESG, because they are now taking it very seriously. And I say this with utmost responsibility. It's because the global West has screwed the environment. They have completely damaged and consumed the environment in a way. And India, therefore, as a country with the highest population in the world, has a very, very important responsibility of making sure they take everybody through the growth path, as Sir was pointing out, but at the same time making sure that we keep environment in mind. And therefore, what will happen now is there will be a lot of disruption India will see. So even at a macroeconomic level, if you see, India is a country which is extremely dependent on oil and other global countries. So each time there's a global conflict, India's balance of payment crisis starts happening. So India will have to very quickly move to newer technologies. So just like how India almost saw a jump on the internet side where computer and laptops just gave way to smartphones, EV technology, I think, will now move very quickly. So I think what law schools now need to do is look at the global models. What are the newer forms of technology that are being embraced, and run courses around, for instance, regulations around what EV technology will look like. What are the various components of it? So you'll have to almost anticipate what could be those new disruptors. And I genuinely think India will see an EV movement far quicker than maybe most of the Western countries have. Just like how UPI, our digital payment system, is one of the most developed in the world. And it happened in a way that most other countries have not been able to understand at the pace it did. So I think similarly, you will see those kind of changes, and law schools also need to have courses around those.
Yeah. So Sanjeev, would you like to add something to what all these three gentlemen in the panel, they have suggested too many things. What would you have to add?
So that is the difficulty that they have suggested almost everything. But then first, let me thank Peter to Legal World for inviting me to share my views on this topic. But if I go by a question, I think fundamentals have significantly changed. And that is what the reason of the discussion today, what we are having. And when I say the fundamentals have changed, even the concept and relevance of ESG, when it was introduced 20 years back in 2004, that concept has also undergone a change today. And I will give you a few reasons for that. When this concept came 20 years back, 2 decades back, at that point of time there was a report, and the report was Who Cares Wins, and it was basically in terms of the investment criteria, how to give credence to non-financial elements in financial decisions or investment decisions. But then since then, this concept has undergone a complete change because of two major reasons. One is there is a complete shift today from what we were talking about shareholder capitalism, which was propounded in late 70s, early 70s. And that concept of shareholders capitalism has changed into stakeholder capitalism. And so that is one fundamental shift. And the second fundamental shift reason was the fourth industrial revolution, as we were talking about those artificial intelligence and all of that. So we are on the edge of fourth industrial revolution, and we have changed the concept of shareholders capitalism to stakeholders capitalism. So it essentially means that there should be a purpose for all, and the purpose for all should lead to growth for all. And the moment we think about these concepts, and you will realize that this is not only just a climate. Some basic data, if you notice, last 50 years we have reduced nearly 70% animal population got reduced. Still, in terms of emission norms, we are 30%. We are using fossil fuels. Now, all these are just a reflection, some data points. But then, do we have a solution? So that we don't now find a solution, we will have to essentially go by these concepts of ESG. And when you said that the legal education part, I think legal education, because of these concepts, the fundamentals of education have completely undergone a change. So it is not the legal education in terms of only the legal aspects of legislative framework. It is basically the profession is now aiming at in terms of addressing the societal needs. And that is the big transformation which has come as far as the legal profession is concerned. And we all know that professions do evolve, professions do get created, and they get created because of the societal needs. And societal needs suggest today that in the fourth industrial revolution, with technology, with innovation, government would have very, very limited and restrictive role in terms of controlling corporates, who would be controlling the lives of people. Now, somewhere we will have to discipline ourselves, and that is why the reason of, in terms of, how the concept of ESG becomes relevant. So ESG, from a traditional concept of giving a number to a non-financial parameter, it has gone beyond all that understanding also. And that is what the I think is requirement as far as legal education is concerned. So this is what my initial thoughts on this is, but now I'm open in terms of further.
Yeah. Thank you, Sanjeev. And before we move on to the second round of questions, we invite Professor Bandyopadhyay, Professor D.K. Bandyopadhyay, as one of the panelists here. So please welcome and join the panel. Professor D.K. Bandyopadhyay is Chief Advisor and Chairman, Law School Amity Group. And sir has been former Vice Chancellor, Guru Gobind Singh Prastha University. Welcome, sir. Yeah. So my next question, and that question, sir, I'll start with you. What kind of skills and competencies do you think, when we are talking about all these ESG, the things which are relevant to future world, say 5 and 10 years down the lane? So what are the kinds of competencies and skills that you think that we as academic institutions should equip our budding lawyers with?
Thank you, Ritu. Thank you, my panelists over sitting over here. As hearing that, they were all looking at the ESG concept from a different perspective. But I have a totally different perspective in my mind. My perspective is that long time we have been discussing that if we want to survive in this planet, we have to balance 4 P's. One of the P is no doubt profit, where the business are lying. No business can survive without profit. Second is the people who are doing this business, who are associated with the business, who are getting the benefit of the business, who are the customer of the business, who are the supply chain members of the business. The people concept. Third is my mother planet, where from we are all taking the resources, whether it's the natural resources, whether it is air, water, mining, everything, coal, petrol, everything we are taking it from the mother planet. So these 3 P's, unless and until we create a balance, the world is going to be destroyed. Why these 3 P's are becoming very important? Because every one of us wants to live in this planet with peaceful mind. So the concept of the 4 P's are very much lying over there in the discussion forum of the committee of COP 21, COP 15, COP 26. And COP 15, Committee of Parties, they decided that the developed world must give billions of dollars, at least $100 billion to the developing countries. And this $100 billion, when they saw in 2023 they were supposed to come, not a single penny has come from the developed countries. It is the developed country who has actually spoiled it. It is the developed country, in the name of their development, they have totally disturbed the balances of the 3P. Now, if that is so, if the money is not coming from there, where from money comes? Where from money comes? That's the reason the concept of the ESG has come up in a very, very big way. That if you are a company, whatever company you may be, you have to follow the different parameter. Previously it was BRS, now BRRRS. You have to follow it up. You have to get it audited. And it has been made compulsory for the at least 1,000 stock listed companies. It has been made compulsory, and now developed countries have realized we are not able to give money. Then at least whenever there is going to be any export coming to us, or we need to import to any other countries, we must follow the environmental parameters. And if we do not follow this environmental parameter, possibly the things cannot be sold. Many times our Indian products, when they are getting exported, they are getting rejected by the developed country because we are not following those environmental parameters. So coming back to the point, this is the way how the company is going to take care both the financial and non-financial part. The non-financial part comes to the ESGs. Now,
yeah.
our students, coming back to the point, our student must be well versed on the skills, specifically the law schools. We have got plethora of laws, Pollution Control Act, Water Act, then your Money Laundering Act, your SEBI Act, all the acts are possible, and in pieces, millions, they are in existence. But there is no as such any ESG regulation till today, ESG law today. So there is a need for formulating an ESG law. That's the point number one. Point number two, the law student must be well aware what is the actual balance we are talking about. Where from the money will be coming. And this money will be needed in terms of use, reuse, reproduce, recycle, and reproduce. These 4 R's are going to be very, very important for us in future life. So our students should be sensitized about them, and the skill they needed in terms of understanding these environmental issues. They need to understanding the social issues, how the society is going to be hampered. Today we are seeing the floods, we are seeing the temperature rise, we are feeling the temperature 45 as 55 degree temperature. Why this type of things have been coming? These are all due to this paradigm. So our students should be in a position to understand and to actually capture those skills.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. And my next question for you, Zameer. So what I want to ask, in last sessions we have talked a lot about experiential learning, we have talked about clinical legal education. So what do you think when it comes to drafting of the contracts? So sustainability, how do we equip our students to add on to that component of sustainability to those drafting skills?
So, today when you draft any contract for shareholder, for example, when somebody is investing in your company, all right? Now, of late, last 2 years, we have seen, and very recently, if I talk about some 6 months back, we've seen these contracts having ESG clauses. And initially 2 years back, they were just clauses in an agreement, which is about 4 lines or 8 lines or probably 3 paragraphs. The recent contract which I saw 6 months back had an annexure of the compliances which are required for ESG. All right? So initially 2 years back, you would see an ESG clause saying that, you should have a ESG policy in place. There are some 40. So one of the if you want an easy example which you can access, go to the website of Hindustan Lever. All right, they have ESG policies which are put. They're all 4-5 pages per policy. So that was one of the first thing we also did. We don't want 100 or 200 pages policy. We'll draft in principle policies about 4-5 pages, which you will not only implement in letter but also in spirit. Okay. So now your contracts are specifically having annexures on what compliances are required. ESG policies are in place, all right? You have governance mechanism is there. The board meeting is conducted in accordance with the governance norms, etc. They pulled out a whole list. And if you don't comply with that, it's a breach of contract, which means the contract can be terminated by the shareholder investor and there can be consequences flowing to it, all right? So your initial stage was that you had contracts where you will put your best effort to have an ESG policy is now converted into an obligation. So what I feel is that once you understand the concept of ESG, when you have your ESG report, which is your BSR report, BRSR report, what you call Business Responsibility and Sustainability report, and then you have the total global practices, Indian practices, global practices put in place. I think 3 things which will remain now fundamentally becoming part of the contract is scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. All right. Just to give you a simple example of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 means the electricity which you are using right now in this premises. Scope 2 will mean the electricity which is now provided by the electric company from whom you are taking this electricity. And scope 3 means the electricity company which is giving you this electricity, how are they buying out their coal or electricity? Okay. So when we were sitting at Harvard Business School and discussing about BMW case, scope 1 for BMW was what they are consuming. Scope 2 is that what are the consumptions or the ESG compliance of their partners from whom they are putting out these suppliers. And scope 3 is what are their suppliers doing to comply with ESG norms, all right? That's the requirement of the fundamentals of ESG which is coming up now in the contracts. So I think it's not only implemented in letter, it's required in spirit. It's not a best effort basis, it's now becoming an obligation for ESG compliance. That's the way forward I see.
Yeah, thank you, Zameer. And my next question is to Amit. What do you think, whatever Zameer just mentioned, say if we talk about 10 years down the lane, what else do you think that students who become future lawyers will have to keep in mind? Like suddenly we had to face this chat GPT, we were talking about AI. So if something of this sort happens in as far as these ESGs are concerned, so what are your advice to those students?
So you heard from one of the leading practitioners in cyber laws in the previous session, and he said we don't know what will come in 2027. Now you're asking me to tell you what is coming in 2034.
Yeah, and that to be
so
very...
what is coming is the fact there's a future which is evolving.
Yeah.
Therefore, what the students and practitioners, even me, has to be alert to is the changing reality and re-equip yourself. You have to constantly engage with the changing supply chain, changing reality of the world, changing demand of the competing economies, and retool yourself. Now, what that technology will be, God alone knows. Are you equipped to handle it? You jolly well should be. Otherwise, you'll be left by the side. You'll not be able to assist a client. Do you understand their needs? Well, this is your job, because you are ultimately providing a service as a counsel to assist them on handling risk, on actualizing value, on developing business propositions that are going to sustain. So that's the whole play. It is not a set of issues which you can put on a sheet and say, all right, year 1, I'm going to read this, year 2, I'm going to read that. No.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic, evolving reality. Your ability to change with the reality and your ability to keep ahead of the curve is the basic.
Right.
That's what all you have to do.
All right. And my next question is for Vaibhav. So when we are talking, these ESGs, while doing this ESG due diligence in your respective corporate firms, so what do you think, what is very common thing which is usually overlooked? Because ultimately you are there for profit, everybody is. So what are those things that usually firms compromise with?
Yeah, so I think, even today, the reality is that if out of 100 M&A deals or 100 investment deals that we see, most of them have ESG completely missing. Until and unless the investment is coming in from, say, a developed world, it's coming in from certain investors in Europe, certain kind of investors from the US. So not all investors from the US and Europe also, by the way. So it's a certain pedigree of investors who raise capital from their own investors on the strength of giving commitments for ESG. And it's those kind of investors who actually get ESG diligence separately done. Because as law firms, the reality is today, it's mostly a compliance-driven analysis that lawyers do, which is making sure they have all their environmental clearances, they have their environmental certifications, they're complying with all your labor laws, and generally the framework of governance. That's the overall sort of tick the box, light touch kind of compliance driven diligences that are actually undertaken. That, however, as I said, the color of money and the quality and the nature of money is driving specific ESG diligences. I must share with all of you that about a year back, and I was sharing with some of the other panelists offline, that I represented one of the large listed Indian private sector banks, which raised a few $100 million from a big multilateral global institution, And when they gave in that money came in as equity, but was perhaps one of the first green equity deals. Why? Because when that global multilateral institution gave in those hundreds of millions of dollars to that bank, they put a lot of riders. They said, going forward, you will not finance thermal. Going forward, if you finance a project which is not going to be carbon neutral 5 years later, you will not finance them. And so on and so forth. So they put a lot of riders on that equity money. And one very interesting issue that we actually had to deal with was that the board of that company, it's a large listed bank with no promoter, and so a lot of independent directors, and they were all saying, why should we take this money with these kind of riders? Because this will affect the growth of the bank, because if bank has the ability to lend to certain thermal power projects, why not? And why should they deprive themselves of the opportunity? So as Professor Sir said, profit, you cannot leave that issue aside. So the bank had to really struggle and say, why should we take this equity from them with so many riders? But eventually they all realized that, look, if you want to be seen as a go-to bank in your sector and be also regarded as a top bank globally, somewhere you'll have to take these poison pills. Which might be viewed as being poison, I beg your pardon, but certainly in the long run will catapult you into a different growth story. And that's what happened with them. And so if you, like I said, I'm repeating myself, but very quickly, you want that global pool of capital, those changes will happen as a result of that. It's ironic. I mean, ideally, these changes should happen organically with the kind of climate change that we are seeing happening around us. I mean, I was just telling somebody, if anybody now tells me climate change is not a reality, I will smack them for having spent 1 month in Delhi to experience the kind of heat and then 1 day of rainfall and look what happened. So look, I think the reality is, if organically we will not change with the climate, the money will make you change. And the money flow is now going to be driven by those requirements.
Absolutely. And my next question goes to Dr. Sanjeev. So, many things we are talking about legal education and academia. So, if I ask, what are the measures that these corporate firms are taking to reduce their carbon footprints or promoting environment sustainability? So, if you could share industry experience on that.
Sure. I think, fundamentally, let's first understand the fundamentals. Fundamentals are that, yes, ESG is now not only it's not a questionable word, so to say. Organizations are seriously complying with those ESG norms. One is certain legal mandates, and even if there are no legal mandates, there are organizations which are focusing on these agenda items. For the simple reason that organizations do believe that the World Economic Forum rightly puts it, all organizations have one objective and universal purpose, and that universal purpose is continuity for all the stakeholders, not only the owners or promoters, but also so many other stakeholders, like from government to employees and so on. So now, with this kind of thought, there are mandates available today from as the professors have also mentioned about BRSR reporting and all that. So all these mandates are being followed by the organizations. But then I have also noticed that there are many organizations who are having only single focus in terms of all their business activities, even if they are diversified businesses, and the single objective is enter into all those businesses where the focus is on decarbonization. Now that is a big shift, as professors have mentioned about that profit motive. Profit motive will always be there as far as commercial organizations are concerned. But then organizations do realize that they have certain duties and responsibilities towards society, and the whole purpose is that the organizations should be serving all the stakeholders. I think that's a big shift, big change in terms of the overall thoughts as far as business organizations are concerned. But then if I come to specifically the legal profession, and since it's gathering of the legal students, I see that from a legal student's standpoint, they cannot be just limiting themselves in terms of the legal framework which is available today in terms of compliance of those ESG related norms. And also again, and whenever we are talking about ESG, we are just limiting ourselves to climate or environmental issues, but then ESG is beyond all that. It's also on the governance part, as Vaibhav also pointed out earlier, from governance to social related issues, also compliance on that part. But then, so the biggest thing which is required is from a legal profession standpoint is that the students or the legal professionals should have that business orientation, and they should realize that whatever they do in terms of whether from litigation to contract to compliances, if anything wrong is done, that may lead to a severe and adverse or a grave impact on the organization from a reputational standpoint to the disruption standpoint to financial obligation standpoint. I think that realization would give them the thought that how and why ESG is not a fashionable term. In fact, it is the base of the organization for the 21st century. This is how I look at it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Professor Bandyopadhyay?
In a nutshell, I like to flag 3 points. First point, the law students should understand the jurisprudential side of ESG. Why ESG came. What is the rationale behind the ESG? Because carbon which are there in the atmosphere is a very long term, 100 years they stay. But we can reduce the carbon footprint year by year by year. So tonnage, gigatons of carbon can be reduced if we are able to follow certain procedures. And most of the companies which are now compelled, no company will be willing to do it, but they are compelled to do it because there is just so much of pressure from different corners. Even the head of the institution, they have started speaking about, we must reach the goalpost by 2030, then they have reached to 2045, then said 2070, the net zero concept. Now if the net zero is the concept for the survival of the mankind, then essentially the jurisprudential side of the ESG must be understood by each and every law student. Why I am doing it? Otherwise, even the companies, they must understand why they are doing it, because they are indirectly financing it. They are indirectly through the ESG compliance, they are financing it from the source to the sink. So this is my take.
Absolutely right, and thank you, because the mandate from the organizers is to wind up the session, and I am very sure that through this session all the panelists have contributed and flagged this important issue, that future lawyers should be well equipped and well trained with all those awareness and learning of the legal framework about ESG, and of course that consciousness in the society. So that social norm is also there. So with that, I thank all my panelists, and I thank Dr. Sanjeev for joining online. And if the panelists would like to say, any one of you in one sentence, any message for law students?
I think I would definitely like
So just one sentence.
Yes, like to re-emphasize what Professor said. Climate consciousness and doing things in your own sphere is the start point. For example, 1 unit of electricity that you consume from coal versus solar, rooftop solar, is, and wind is 178, literally 1.3% of the same amount of carbon footprint. So without doing anything, by just that substitution, you are able to help the environment. And there's so many other things, single-use plastic, various other things that could be done, carrying your own cloth bag in your car or along with your bag whenever you're going out, rather than taking plastic from the store. All of these can make a huge difference without our realizing. So minor adjustments can go along.
Absolutely. So this is what...
One sentence for the law student, that try to take up ESG as a career, it has a bright future.
Thank you so much. And all these suggestions from the panelists and all those exuberating expectations of the industry from law institutions and law students. So here I just hand it over to Ashima and the organizers.